Ladies and gentlemen, evil does not always arrive with fire and brimstone. More often it whispers, weaves, and works in subtleties. It bends the truth, twists our desires, and turns light into shadow until we mistake the abyss for a path. The agents of darkness do not march openly, for deception is their craft, and silence is their shroud. If we do not guard our souls, we may one day wake to find ourselves not merely surrounded by evil, but its willing accomplices. So let us arm ourselves not with sword and shield, but with wisdom and vigilance. Here are 5 signs that the demonic is at work in the world, and perhaps even in our own hearts. Evil does not announce itself with horns and fire. It does not come bearing a banner of darkness, nor does it introduce itself as the enemy. Instead, it wears a disguise familiar, appealing, even logical. The greatest trick of evil is to make its presence seem like nothing at all, or worse, to make it appear good. If men recognize malevolence outright, they would resist it. So instead, deception is its craft, subtlety its weapon. The easiest way to corrupt is not by imposing wickedness, but by distorting truth. A lie boldly declared can be challenged, but a lie interwoven with truth is far more dangerous. A cup of pure poison is rejected, but a single drop in a goblet of wine may go unnoticed. So it is with deception. It does not ask us to abandon what is right all at once. Instead, it asks for small compromises, little shifts, slight alterations to our perception. It does not begin with a blatant denial of virtue, but with its quiet redefinition. Consider how the virtues of justice, love, and freedom have, at times, been twisted beyond recognition. Justice, a noble principle, can be corrupted when it turns into vengeance. Love, meant to be selfless and disciplined, is warped into indulgence that excuses sin. Freedom, a gift meant for responsibility, is reshaped into license, where nothing is sacred and all is permissible. None of these corruptions occur overnight. They happen through slow erosion, through arguments that sound reasonable, through the persuasion that to resist is to be old-fashioned, intolerant, or blind. This is why deception is so effective. It makes us believe we are choosing good while nudging us ever so slightly toward darkness. Evil does not care if a man believes in it. In fact, it prefers that he does not. A man who sees no enemy does not defend himself. A man who believes himself too enlightened for the concept of evil will dismiss all warnings, laughing at the idea that something beyond human schemes and psychology is at play. But the absence of belief does not mean the absence of influence. A man may scoff at the idea of poison, but if he drinks it, he will still suffer its effects. The agents of deception are not only in whispers and thoughts, but also in the culture, in the voices that shape our understanding of right and wrong. What was once shameful becomes acceptable, and what was once noble becomes foolish. Not by force, not by command, but by slow suggestion, by endless repetition, until the mind adjusts to the new reality without even noticing. The goal is not to persuade the soul to embrace evil outright, but to make it indifferent, weary of resisting, uncertain of its own convictions. A world that no longer believes in right and wrong is a world ripe for the taking. Thus, deception remains the favored tool of darkness. It does not come as an enemy, it comes as a friend, a liberator, a voice of reason. And by the time it is recognized, the battle is already well underway. The most dangerous idol a man can worship is himself. It begins with a whisper: "You deserve more. You are the master of your own destiny. You owe no one but yourself." It flatters, assuring us that self-exaltation is the key to freedom. But the road of self-worship does not lead to liberation, it leads to chains, invisible at first, but unbreakable in the end. When a man makes himself the center of his world, he believes he is taking control. He sets his own rules, answers only to his own desires, and dismisses anything that would restrain him. At first, this seems like power. He feels unrestricted, unburdened by the expectations of morality, duty, or sacrifice. But in reality, he is simply handing himself over to his own impulses, which soon become his masters. What begins as self-love turns into self-indulgence. What begins as personal ambition turns into insatiable craving. The man who once sought freedom from all authority finds himself enslaved to his own passions, unable to say no to what once seemed harmless. Pride blinds him to his descent. He tells himself he is still in control, that he is merely enjoying the rewards of self-determination. But the more he feeds his desires, the more they demand. His pursuit of pleasure becomes compulsion. His thirst for recognition becomes desperation. He cannot tolerate criticism, for to question him is to question the God he has become in his own mind. He surrounds himself only with those who affirm him, rejecting truth if it wounds his pride. And the higher he builds his throne, the more fragile it becomes. What self-worship offers is not true freedom, because true freedom requires the ability to govern oneself, to choose virtue over vice, wisdom over impulse, humility over arrogance. The man who worships himself rejects any law higher than his own will, but a will ungoverned by anything greater soon collapses into chaos. He becomes a slave to his own ego, needing constant validation, terrified of anything that challenges his supremacy. He cannot love truly, for love requires sacrifice, and sacrifice is impossible for one who places himself above all others. He cannot find peace, for peace requires contentment, and contentment cannot exist where self-worship demands more and more. And so what began as a promise of autonomy ends in servitude. The man who sought to answer only to himself now finds himself unable to resist his own cravings, unable to live without admiration, unable to escape the emptiness his self-worship has created. The great irony of his existence is that he set out to become his own master and ended up the most pitiful of slaves. He wanted to be free, but in refusing to bow to anything greater than himself, he bowed instead to the cruelest tyrant of all his own unchecked desires. Love, when left undisciplined and without truth, becomes something far removed from its original nature. It is one of the most powerful forces in existence, capable of building or destroying, healing or corrupting. Love, in its highest form, is selfless, seeking the good of another even at a cost to oneself. But when love is divorced from truth, when it is driven only by feeling and impulse, it ceases to be love at all, and becomes either indulgence or obsession, both of which lead to ruin. The world often presents love as something boundless, unrestricted, something that should be followed wherever it leads, without hesitation or question. It whispers that love is enough on its own, that nothing else, neither wisdom nor restraint, should govern it. But love without discipline, without the guiding hand of truth, does not uplift, it consumes. It becomes blind affection, enabling wrongdoing in the name of care. It excuses faults that should be corrected, permits harm under the guise of understanding, and allows destruction in the name of devotion. It convinces a parent to never correct a child, a friend to never speak a difficult truth, a lover to tolerate betrayal. This is not love, it is cowardice dressed in tenderness. Real love does not merely feel, it acts. It does not seek comfort at all costs, but the highest good, even when that good is difficult. It understands that to love someone truly is not to shield them from all pain, nor to approve of all they do, but to guide them toward what is right. Love without discipline spoils rather than nurtures. It lets a person stray further into error rather than risk offense. But love that is disciplined, rooted in truth, knows that correction is not cruelty, and that withholding approval is not withholding care. The parent who disciplines his child does so not out of harshness, but out of a desire to shape the child into someone strong and virtuous. The friend who rebukes does so not out of spite, but because love values honesty over comfort. Discipline ensures that love does not become reckless. Without it, love is reduced to mere passion, a fleeting emotion that sways with circumstances. But real love endures. It remains when emotions wane, when hardship arises, when sacrifices must be made. Passion alone cannot sustain love. It must be anchored by truth. A love ruled only by feeling will excuse what should not be excused, cling to what should be let go, and pursue what should be abandoned. It will demand loyalty where none is deserved, justify actions that are harmful, and mistake selfish desire for devotion. But a love that is both disciplined and truthful transforms. It does not allow indulgence to masquerade as care. It does not enable destruction under the guise of loyalty. It does not fear discomfort when truth must be spoken. It is strong where false love is weak, steady where mere passion falters. It builds instead of destroys, because it understands that love, to be real, must be both kind and wise, both tender and firm, both unshakable and just. Pleasure and despair, though seemingly opposite, are two sides of the same trap. One lulls the soul into complacency, while the other crushes it under the weight of hopelessness. Both, if unchecked, bind a person in chains that are difficult to break. The pursuit of pleasure is often seen as the path to freedom, a way to escape suffering and find fulfillment. But pleasure, when sought for its own sake, does not satisfy, it only deepens hunger. It offers a momentary high, a fleeting sense of contentment that demands to be repeated again and again. What begins as enjoyment soon becomes dependency. The man who once sought pleasure as a means of living now lives only to seek pleasure. The chains of pleasure are not forged overnight. They begin as harmless indulgence, as small justifications to avoid hardship, responsibility, or discipline. A moment of laziness turns into a habit. A single distraction turns into an addiction. Soon the soul, once full of ambition and strength, becomes dulled. Hardship, which once built character, is now avoided at all costs. Comfort becomes the highest goal, and anything that threatens it is met with resistance. The man who is ruled by pleasure is not free. He is a slave to his cravings, unable to endure difficulty, unable to stand firm when sacrifice is required. His chains are invisible, but they are no less real. Despair works differently but achieves the same result. It does not entice with sweetness but crushes with bitterness. It does not promise happiness but ensures that happiness is impossible. While pleasure deceives by saying, "This is enough, seek nothing more," despair whispers, "Nothing is enough, seek nothing at all." It drains the will to fight, the desire to hope, the belief that anything good is worth pursuing. Where pleasure blinds a man with indulgence, despair blinds him with suffering. In both cases, the result is inaction, a surrender of the soul's strength. The man consumed by despair sees the world through a fog of futility. He is convinced that nothing he does matters, that no effort will bring change, that no struggle is worth enduring. Like the man who is ruled by pleasure, he avoids hardship, but not because he seeks comfort. He avoids it because he believes it is meaningless. He is trapped, not by excess, but by emptiness. His chains are forged not by indulgence, but by hopelessness. Both pleasure and despair lead to the same outcome, paralysis. One keeps a man distracted, the other keeps him defeated. Neither allows him to live fully, to embrace truth, to fight for what is right. He is either too comfortable to move or too broken to try. The great deception is that pleasure feels like freedom and despair feels like clarity, but both are illusions. They do not strengthen a man, they weaken him. They do not release him, they bind him. They do not lead to life, they ensure that he is never truly alive at all. Mockery has long been a weapon, but it is never so sharp as when it is aimed at the sacred. There is a reason that virtue, faith, and holiness are not merely ignored by those who oppose them, but ridiculed. To attack something directly requires engaging with it, wrestling with its truth, and offering an alternative. But mockery sidesteps that struggle. It does not need to refute or disprove, it only needs to belittle. It replaces reason with laughter, conviction with cynicism, reverence with scorn. And in doing so, it robs the sacred of its weight in the minds of those who witness it. Mockery does not destroy through force, it erodes through shame. A man who believes in something good and true can endure opposition, but if he is made to feel foolish for his belief, he may begin to waver. No one wishes to be seen as naive, backward, or weak. When the sacred is ridiculed, it is not because it has been proven false or oppressive, but because mockery makes belief uncomfortable. The pressure to conform is not applied through reasoned debate, but through the fear of looking ridiculous. What begins as hesitation soon becomes silence. What begins as silence becomes surrender. This is why evil so often chooses mockery over direct confrontation. If virtue, faith, and morality were fought on honest ground, they would stand firm. But mockery disguises the attack. It makes it seem as though nothing serious is happening at all, as though it is all just amusement, harmless banter, a joke. But there is nothing harmless about the slow, deliberate stripping away of reverence. A generation that laughs at virtue will not defend it. A culture that mocks holiness will not pursue it. And the more the sacred is treated as absurd, the easier it is to cast it aside. There is also an arrogance in mockery, a belief that nothing is beyond human scrutiny, that nothing is higher than human wit. To mock the sacred is to place oneself above it, to assume a position of superiority, to believe that nothing is worthy of awe. This is no accident. It is a deliberate inversion, a subtle shifting of power. Once a man believes he has outgrown reverence, he believes he owes nothing to anything beyond himself. This is the goal. Not simply to destroy belief, but to replace it with pride, to ensure that a man scoffs at what he once held sacred and calls it enlightenment. The true danger of mockery is not just in what it tears down, but in what it leaves behind. When the sacred is stripped away, something will take its place. If virtue is laughed at, vice will be normalized. If holiness is ridiculed, corruption will be embraced. The world does not become empty, it simply fills with something else. And in that space where reverence once stood, there will be nothing left but arrogance, emptiness, and a soul that believes it is free, even as it marches willingly toward its own ruin. Evil is not defeated by strength alone, nor by intelligence, nor even by good intentions. It is overcome only when courage, humility, and unwavering goodness stand together. A man may be brave, but if his bravery is without wisdom, he will charge forward recklessly and fall. He may be humble, but if his humility lacks courage, he will bow to falsehood rather than stand for truth. He may be good, but if his goodness wavers in the face of resistance, it will crumble under pressure. It is only when these three virtues work together that evil is truly confronted and overcome. Courage is necessary because evil is relentless. It does not yield simply because one wishes it to, nor does it retreat when it is opposed. It presses forward, testing the strength of those who resist it. It whispers fear into the hearts of men, persuading them that standing against it is too dangerous, too costly, too futile. And many falter, but those who understand the nature of evil know that it thrives on surrender. It wins not because it is stronger, but because it convinces its opponents upon it back down. This is why courage is essential. To defeat evil, one must be willing to face it, even when the odds seem overwhelming, even when standing firm means standing alone. Yet courage without humility can become arrogance. It is not enough to be bold, one must also recognize that victory is not achieved by human strength alone. A man who believes himself invincible will eventually be undone by his own pride. He will overestimate his ability, underestimate the enemy, and refuse wisdom when it is given to him. Humility keeps courage from becoming recklessness. It reminds a man that he is not the author of goodness, only its servant. It teaches him to listen, to learn, to recognize that true strength comes not from self-reliance, but from aligning with what is right. A proud warrior fights for himself, a humble one fights for truth, and only the latter can truly prevail. But neither courage nor humility is enough without unwavering goodness. Evil does not always appear as an obvious enemy. More often, it disguises itself as compromise, as convenience, as the lesser of two evils. It persuades men to justify small wrongs, assuring them that the ends will make up for the means. And many fall into this trap, believing they can oppose evil while using its own weapons. But to fight darkness with darkness is to be consumed by it. The only way to overcome evil is through unwavering goodness, through a refusal to stoop to its level, through a commitment to truth even when falsehood is easier, through a dedication to virtue even when corruption promises reward. Victory is not won in a single moment. It is the result of countless small choices, choosing courage over fear, humility over pride, goodness over convenience. Evil is persistent, but it is not invincible. It can be resisted. It can be defeated. But only by those who have the strength to stand, the wisdom to kneel, and the resolve to never become what they fight against.